Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started then. So hi everyone. Today's section is we're going to talk about resiliency opportunities through LEED for cities in the wake of COVID-19. And just as a little disclaimer, we're not medical professionals, so we really encourage you to consult professional experts in regards to the health and policy associations with the things that we're going to mention that relate to COVID-19. So just a little introduction about our session. So in the wake of COVID-19, government leaders all over the world have been faced with fallout from a long neglected issue, which is the resiliency of cities and communities. And this unprecedented pandemic has shed light on how poorly equipped we are as a global society in dealing with these types of emergency situations at the local level. And much of this stems from uncoordinated urban planning and severe lack of holistic solutions, making emergency situations much more difficult to deal with. So our cities are going to compete around resiliency, workforce efficiency, emissions reduction, mobility rates, public health, water availability, geopolitical risks, and now also pandemic readiness. And these challenges, they offer a big opportunity for us to reinvent our cities for a more sustainable, resilient, and healthy future. And so for those reasons, we're very excited about the LEED certifications framework that the MGBCE has developed, not only to make cities and communities more environmentally sustainable, but also more resilient in the process. And LEED for Cities identifies strategies and solutions for urban resiliency in a variety of sustainability categories. And from these frameworks and categories, our speakers will discuss some of the best practices that governing bodies can implement, whether pursuing LEED certifications or not, to adapt cities for these new challenges that we are facing now and in the future. So to introduce our speakers, we have four incredible speakers today, Mike, Madison, Amanda, and Drew. We have two speakers from Verdani Partners, Mike and Madison, and two speakers from the city of Santa Monica, Amanda and Drew. So introducing Michael, he's Green Building Certifications and Engineering Coordinator at Verdani Partners. He has over 3 years of experience working on green building certifications for both new construction and existing buildings. And he holds credentials including LEED Green Associate, Fitwel Ambassador, and Eco Districts AP. And much of his current work focuses on LEED BOM, O&M, and Fitwel projects, while also assisting the Verdani engineers with indoor quality and testing services. Our next speaker is Madison. Madison Dorman is an Associate Certifications Manager from Verdani Partners. She's a LEED Green Associate, a WELL AP, and a Fitwel Ambassador. And most of her work focuses on LEED BOM certifications, Fitwel, Green Globes, and IRAM projects. She's also currently assisting the USGBC San Diego chapter in pursuing LEED for Cities and Community certification for Balboa Park in San Diego, which is really exciting. Next, we have Amanda Grossman. She's a sustainability analyst with the City of Santa Monica Office of Sustainability and the Environment. In addition to overseeing the city's plastic reduction policies, Amanda's manages Santa Monica Sustainability City Plan Performance Management website, and she recently published Santa Monica's first sustainability rights report that measures the health of the local environment. Currently, Amanda is also the project manager for Santa Monica LEED for Cities application, so we're really excited to have Amanda with us today. And finally, we have Drew. He's a senior sustainability analyst at the City of Santa Monica's Office of Sustainability and the Environment, and he leads the climate and energy team. He has 11 years of experience working with cities, business, schools, and homeowners on a variety of sustainability projects. In his current role, he focuses on Santa Monica's green building and energy policies and programs, including REACH codes and procurement of renewables. Drew is also responsible for implementing actions in the city's climate action and adaptation plan with a concentration on zero carbon buildings. So we're very excited to have Drew with us today. And in terms of today's agenda, the Verdani team, Madison's going to give an introduction to LEED for cities and LEED for cities during COVID-19. Mike's going to talk about resiliency in cities and best practices. And the City of Santa Monica team is going to do a case study of the City of Santa Monica. And City of Santa Monica is a very progressive city. So we're really happy that they're on our panel today. After that, Michael is going to do some closing statements, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. So I would recommend, in terms of the Q&A, that, while we're speaking, if you have a question, if you want to put it on the chat function, we might be able to answer them in writing. But then afterwards, I'm going to moderate the Q&A. So I would also, if you have a question for a specific speaker, if you can, let's say, hey, this question is for Mike, and write your question, then we can go through at the end and see if we may not be able to answer all the questions depending on how many we get, but we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And with that, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Or Madison.
Madison. It's all right. Thank you, Danielle, for that beautiful introduction.
Oh, to Madison.
Yeah, no worries. So to kick off today's presentation, I will be giving a brief overview of the LEED for Cities certification. So LEED version 4.1 for cities and communities was launched by the U.S. Green Building Council in 2016. Although today we will be focusing on the LEED for Cities portion of this certification, when a project begins their certification process, they will either choose to pursue the cities route or communities, which is based on the population that's going to be impacted. To date, there are more than 100 cities and communities around the globe pursuing this certification. In February of this year, Bank of America had actually provided a $500,000 grant to assist local governments with obtaining the certification. One of those is the City of Santa Monica, which will be showcased today. So this certification does include 7 credit categories, which are integrative process, natural systems and ecology, transportation and land use, water efficiency, energy and greenhouse gas emissions, materials and resources, and quality of life. This certification has brought on a lot of new leadership and resiliency to the world by improving sustainability performance and highlighting gaps for improvements. Next slide. As we all know, COVID-19 has greatly impacted cities and communities around the world. So using the LEED for Cities framework, cities can be equipped to face these ever-changing challenges. This global pandemic we are in has shifted society's way of thinking about sustainability and resiliency as a whole. COVID-19 has affected vulnerable populations, raised concerns about social inequalities, and provided transparency in the places we live, work, and play. LEED aims to raise the standard of living around the world and quality of life for all humans. This framework also helps us better understand and track standard of living within a population, which does include education, equitability, prosperity, and health safety. So although the standard was developed and released before the COVID-19 pandemic had started, the certification does provide tools to prepare for a post-COVID world. This certification gives cities a strengthened ability to respond to and adapt to climate change risks, natural and man-made hazards, and, natural and man-made hazards and other risks that we are facing with. This framework does help us prepare for extreme events, including public health crises. It has also really emphasized the need to be self-sufficient and for us to source locally. Since its release, LEED has provided Safety First Innovation pilot credits that supplement this certification and give cities a structure of how to develop plans for facing the unknown future of pandemics. Next slide.
Thanks, Madison. So yeah, as Madison expressed, resiliency in our cities has never been more important. The effects of climate change have gradually affected our cities for decades now, And this has pushed us towards thinking more and more about the importance of resiliency planning as time has gone on. Now, the current state of the world that we are in due to COVID has only increased the need for resilient development and has made it much more urgent. If the pandemic has shown us anything, it's that our cities still struggle greatly with addressing emergency situations, let alone a global health crisis. Some communities are better off than others, but we need to ensure that all citizens have access to resilient infrastructure moving forward. Much of our problems stem from the fact that the history of urban planning in this country has been far more linear than holistic. Our cities tend to only serve the needs of the wealthy and upper class and end up leaving behind the people who rely on effective urban planning the most. As you can imagine, this is a huge environmental justice issue. This means that we need to engage with stakeholders and community leaders from all walks of life and ensure that our sustainability and resiliency solutions are coordinated and wide-ranging. Incorporating the right safeguards and making our cities more resilient in the long run will minimize the impacts that drastic events such as COVID will have. So how do we start this process? Luckily, the LEED for Cities rating system offers an excellent framework for local leaders and governing bodies to at least begin thinking about and implementing resilient best practices. Our goal in this presentation is to introduce you to the rating system as it can be a useful tool for identifying urban solutions for resiliency, regardless of whether you plan to pursue actual certification or not. So in this next section, we will be discussing a handful of urban planning best practices related to resiliency solutions in cities. We will also be identifying the related LEED for Cities credits that these best practices either fully or partially contribute to. So the first best practice is to assemble a diverse project team. For anyone familiar with LEED for new construction, you already understand the importance of implementing an integrative design process, which is a comprehensive approach to project planning and goal setting at the building level. In the context of cities, this integrative approach is essential for engaging stakeholders from all local communities and creating solutions that benefit everyone. As an example, I live down in San Diego, and there is a severe lack of public transportation options. While this hardly affects much of the middle and upper class communities who own cars, there are many people in the city who rely heavily on public transit to get around. Overall, this speaks to a huge lack of representation of these lower income communities in the city planning process and reinforces the idea that we need to make that process much more holistic in scope. So when assembling your project team, the members should have a diverse set of expertise and moreover come from a variety of backgrounds. This includes professionals such as urban planners, dedicated resiliency officers, pandemic preparedness officers, and leaders from the most vulnerable communities. After coordinating your core project team, you must create a comprehensive plan with a clear vision of the future. Ask yourself questions like, what are the most significant factors affecting the city? What solutions could have the largest positive impact for vulnerable communities? What are the project goals and how will progress be measured? It's also important to incorporate contingency planning for the highest potential risks and vulnerabilities. As Madison mentioned earlier, LEED for Cities offers new innovation credits related to pandemic planning and social equity, which does involve putting together a diverse team for pandemic preparedness and response. The integrative approach that I've discussed is essential for this process, especially in light of COVID-19. We need to plan and account for the people in our society who are most susceptible to this virus, and that is only achieved when we have all of the right leaders working together.
So as Mike has mentioned, your diverse team should be thinking about ways to prepare for the future. One of those ways to prepare is by developing a resiliency plan. This pandemic has truly been a test for cities to verify and understand how well equipped and robust those current preparedness plans are. By utilizing this LEED for Cities framework, stakeholders should evaluate plans and identify any disparities. A resiliency plan should address climate adaptation and address the question, How prepared is the city to evolve and face the impacts of climate change? The plan should also account for emergency and contingency planning and address the question, how will cities respond to disasters such as the extensive forest fires we have been affected by locally? And they should prioritize the most at-risk parts of the city that need to be helped. Out of the many things that risk communities may lack, one of those is power access and reliability. This can have a domino effect on creating issues for other human basic needs. Next slide. Demand for all forms of energy is projected to continue to soar in the coming years with a growing and increasingly affluent global population. We are particularly reliant upon oil for both transportation and product manufacture, and with the uncertain shadow of peak oil looming, there is reason for concern about our ability to meet that demand. The energy performance of a city's infrastructure and building fabric is a key determinant of its capacity for resilience. Reducing a city's per capita energy consumption is critical in reducing the impact of shocks or stresses associated with future energy costs. As we have experienced recently down here in San Diego, the power grids cannot keep up with the energy demand and the heat that has put a strain on our energy supply. This may continue to be a growing issue as people work from home and consume more energies than the cities were anticipating. One of the ways some cities in Southern California are planning to provide energy security and demand flexibility during wildfires and unplanned electricity outages is by incorporating microgrids. In fact, a 4-year microgrid project funded and conducted as a demonstration by California had shown results that the 7 project participants saved on average 20 to 60% on utility bills, as well as prevented power outages in many cases. Utilizing microgrids is important for many cities, including Santa Monica, as they move towards a zero emissions future. And next slide. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, over half of the world's population now lives in cities and are responsible for 70% of global CO2 emissions and 2/3 of the world's energy consumption. When cities pursue LEED for City certification, they are demonstrating a commitment to prioritize sustainable improvement of the places we call home. By measuring and tracking trends of quality of life year over year, cities can formulate a plan that includes goals for ways to continuously better the lives of their citizens. LEED for Cities encourages users to track metrics including health and safety, education, equitability, and prosperity. Unfortunately, living in a city can encourage poor dietary choices and increase the amount of food waste. Some ways to make a city healthier and more sustainable includes promoting urban agriculture, encouraging healthier diets, reducing and managing food waste, boosting green spaces for healthier environments and improved lifestyles, and reconnecting cities with surrounding rural areas. Tracking said metrics is important for cities, even those not pursuing LEED for City certification, to evaluate and plan for those affected by COVID-19. Monitoring trends such as unemployment rates, average household income, and gross rent can enable cities to create a way to bring citizens back to the workforce, improve livelihood, and provide healthy food security. One of the LEED for City Safety First pilot innovation credits includes making sure social equity is factored into pandemic planning. Cities need to consider how relevant information about the pandemic, public health, and healthcare facilities is distributed. How is the community involved, engaged, and educated on these factors? How are mitigation measures being applied? And what emergency services, infrastructure, and facilities are in place to prioritize the needs of low-income or vulnerable populations such as the elderly? As we move towards a future past COVID, these are the things cities will need to continue to prepare for and improve on to create a livable and prosperous society. Slide.
Okay. So the next best practice is increasing urban walkability. Particularly in Southern California, we tend to have more car-centric urban infrastructure, which as mentioned earlier, doesn't necessarily serve everyone equally in our cities. So how do we solve this? Well, there are a variety of solutions to making cities less car-centric and more human-centric through focusing on walkability. This includes a combination of increasing accessibility to community services while also enhancing pedestrian infrastructure and improving safety. First, it's always important to incorporate more community services within the more homogeneous areas of the city, like the suburbs or other areas, for instance. This may involve relaxing many outdated zoning codes that strictly prevent diverse types of development in these areas, increasing the density of services such as grocery stores and medical centers to make them more accessible and walkable for residents can be very beneficial to the resiliency of cities. For one, these improvements provide people who don't own cars better access to food and medical care, which in the face of a global health pandemic provides an increased level of safety. And even for people who do own cars, but are looking to decrease expenses because maybe they lost their job. Now they have more options for getting around to the services they need without spending money on gas or car maintenance. Another solution is incorporating high quality and safe pedestrian infrastructure to encourage more people to walk. This includes creating more gridded developments, adding road markers and pedestrian crossing medians, and making streets narrower and wider sidewalks. If we're thinking about COVID, wider sidewalks in particular help people maintain a safe distance from other pedestrians, while also not feeling the need to walk into a busy street to do so. And even going back to the point about relaxing zoning codes, right now you're seeing cities allow restaurants to incorporate outdoor seating on sidewalks and parking spaces to increase safety during the pandemic while also helping local businesses stay afloat. This zoning flexibility is key for allowing cities to be more adaptive when dealing with extreme circumstances. So as a recap, focusing on walkability and moreover livability, cities can become more resilient through increasing access to services, building equity for all communities, and improving long-term safety infrastructure. So the next best practice is incorporating green spaces into urban areas. Much of this involves redeveloping underutilized spaces such as vacant lots or abandoned buildings into vibrant green spaces for public use. Green spaces such as parks or restorative gardens have shown to provide a variety of benefits for the overall health of a community, which includes reducing stress and anxiety, increasing physical activity, providing a sense of place, and even cleaning the air through carbon sequestration. These health benefits translate into less stress on the local healthcare systems due to higher overall public health, which in the end conserves medical resources for extreme situations like COVID. Additionally, these green spaces have added resiliency benefits of creating natural habitats to conserve local biodiversity, and also improving stormwater infiltration to combat flooding. And then lastly, the final best practice that we will discuss is reducing potable water use. It may seem obvious, but the sustainability and resilience of potable water is essential to us as humans. On that premise, our cities tend to use a lot of potable water for services that have nothing to do with sustaining human life, such as watering for turf grass, public fountains, and golf courses. One solution is to incorporate more gray water recycling systems for public amenities that do not require potable water use. It's also important to maintain robust wastewater treatment and sanitation systems to increase the supply of reclaimed water. And then to better improve water efficiency, cities can install smart technologies that track and monitor water supply systems for data collection on an ongoing basis. This helps with conducting regular water audits to detect leaks, losses, and infiltration of contaminants. And as I alluded to earlier, water is the most important resource that we have. So creating resilient systems to preserve it in times of crisis is essential. Okay, so now I will be handing it off to our guest speakers from the city of Santa Monica, Amanda Grossman and Drew Johnston, uh, where they can provide some real world insights and strategies that they've been working on for their Lead for Cities project. So take it away.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. This is Amanda with the City of Santa Monica, and I'm joined by my colleague Drew to talk about some recent things that Santa Monica is working on to become more resilient. Next slide. So just to give a brief overview of Santa Monica's size and a very brief history of sustainability in Santa Monica is actually fairly small in size. Our jurisdiction's only 8 square miles. And one of our edges is actually the coast and approximately 245 acres of beach. Our permanent population is roughly around 90,000, and our daytime population can double or triple with commuters, tourists, and local visitors. Santa Monica has been an early adopter of citywide sustainability with the adoption of our Sustainable City Plan in 1994. It's a comprehensive framework for environmental, economic, and societal progress. Years later, in 2013, Santa Monica adopted the 15 by 15 Climate Action Plan, setting a carbon emissions reduction target of 15% below 1990 levels by 2015. We ended up exceeding that target and reduced our emissions by 20% below 1990 levels in 2015. And just last year, we adopted the next reiteration of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, giving us a roadmap to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2030. Currently, we are estimating a 46% reduction below 1990 levels. And while we've come a long way, we still have a ways to go. And our early efforts have set the groundwork for some of our newer projects that we're working on. Next slide. As Madison had mentioned, Santa Monica is one of the recipients of the 2020 Bank of America grant. So we're a part of the cohort for LEED for Cities. We're currently working on our application for certification and compiling data for the different credits. And while measuring sustainability performance is not new to Santa Monica, it's important for us to evolve and adapt our indicators to best analyze our performance. LEED for Cities is adaptive, and it's a great way to keep up with standards that other cities are using to measure their performance. And that way, Santa Monica is able to identify any gaps or shortcomings or things that we can measure a little bit differently. The latest version of our Sustainable City Plan has set targets for 2020. And as we look to set targets for the next milestone, we would like to use LEED for Cities as a guiding post to identify new indicators and targets. Next slide. Another project that we're starting on to help us with resiliency. We're in the early stages of developing a good food for all agenda for Santa Monica. And we want to identify the vulnerable populations within our city, identify any food deserts and food insecurities, as well as identify any existing programs and policies that could impact access to food in Santa Monica, and look for ways that we can measure the performance of these programs. In light of COVID-19, it's really shed light on what programs are essential for our residents to receive food. And we want to look for ways to ensure that these programs are resilient. While food is not specifically a LEED for Cities target, there are a number of credits that can relate to food systems, as well as the quality of life credits and indicators that can help us evaluate the equitability of our food system and identify vulnerable populations. Next slide. In light of events that have transpired over the last few months, Santa Monica wants to take a closer look at our racial equitability. Santa Monica has been a member of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity for the past couple of years, but our leadership really wants to make it more of a priority in our employees' workflow and time, and getting more staff involved within the organization. Santa Monica has also identified 1.5 full-time employees to spearhead racial equity programs and policies in Santa Monica. And one of those individuals has been actually transferred to the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. So we're excited to work closely with them for our sustainability initiative. Santa Monica has also hosted several forums and working groups within the organization in recent months to discuss racial equity within our organization, giving individuals the channel to share their experiences and identify where there could be systemic changes within the organization. As a local government, we also need to look outward toward the community. So we've also hosted a couple of forums and working groups within the community. And our council is committed to developing a Black agenda to address any racial injustice in the city. While our Sustainable City Plan does include social equity, LEED for Cities has helped us to identify quality of life indicators that we should be tracking and measuring. And as I mentioned, LEED for Cities certification is adaptive. And even in the short time that Santa Monica has been involved with the program, they've added different credits, and one specific to social equity for pandemic planning. So it's important for us to determine whether we qualify for that credit, and if not, what are the things that we can implement in order to qualify for that in the future. And with that, I'll hand it off to my coworker, Drew.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Drew Johnstone with the City of Santa Monica's Office of Sustainability. And I'm gonna take a few minutes to introduce you to a few key documents that the city has recently prepared relating to resiliency that are included in our LEED for Cities application. Our vulnerability assessment, shown here, identifies key city sectors and local hazards caused by climate change. What we've documented in this assessment is how the impacts of climate change differ for various sectors and populations, whether it's infrastructure, buildings, businesses, residents, or visitors. So some sectors, as you can imagine, are better resourced and equipped to withstand these impacts, while some are more vulnerable and may become even more vulnerable without a means to adapt. This assessment provided a framework for adaptation and resiliency planning, which was a critical precursor to the development of the city's climate action and adaptation plan, which was approved by council in 2019. Our CAP addresses climate change from a city-wide perspective with a focus both on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and increasing the resiliency of the city's assets. Next slide, please. We also, so I lead our climate and energy team, and one of my tasks is resilient energy action planning. So what we've done is look at strategic municipal facilities that serve the city, its residents and businesses, and we want to be able to power them in the event of grid outages. So for each of the sites listed here, we developed a plan that identifies carbon-free microgrid solutions to maintain emergency operations during utility outages. You can see like our main library already has existing diesel generators, and it's also a backup emergency operations center should our public safety facility not be available for any reason. So, these critical sites here have been a high priority. So we're looking into, costs and, different resiliency tiers for each of these sites. So each of these facilities has plans for 3 critical components: on-site solar photovoltaics, battery energy storage, and microgrid controls that integrate those elements. The resiliency tiers that we analyzed range from maxing out the solar potential and full battery backup to only backing up critical loads for 3 days. So there's a range of technology solutions with, of course, different costs that were analyzed. So as funding becomes available, we're going to try to integrate as much as we can during these at these sites. Excuse me. Next slide. So finally, I want to talk about resiliency hubs. Pictured here is our LEED Platinum Pico Branch Library, which is sited in a LEED Silver park called Virginia Avenue Park, which is actually the first park in the nation to achieve LEED certification. This park and library are already a community hub. It's a popular, fully programmed site that includes a weekly farmers market, youth programs, community meetings, and is actually a family assistance center during disruptions. It also happens to be in a Cal Virus Screen disadvantaged community. It's one of our goals to augment this site to be an official resiliency hub. So the term resiliency hub means that the site can operate in 3 operating conditions. normal conditions, which is 99% of the year, but also during times of disruption and recovery. So resiliency hubs are able to support residents and local businesses by coordinating important communication, distributing resources, while also reducing carbon pollution. So since the site is already a place that the community relies upon during normal operations, our goal is to add battery energy backup systems to ensure the facility can be a hub even during those disruption events. The city is going to rely upon Resilience Hub guidance documents from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, as well as the USGBCE Building Resilience Framework. So that is the rest of my slides. So I'd be happy to take questions and closing statements. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew, for those insights and a look into what's involved in a real world LEED for Cities project. I'm definitely excited to see where it goes. So to wrap up this presentation, I just wanted to end on a few notes to help encourage everyone to start thinking a little bit more about resiliency planning. There are many avenues for enhancing the resiliency and sustainability of a city, and LEED for Cities provides an excellent framework to at least get started. The best practices and real-world applications that we talked about today can vastly improve the lives of citizens all throughout the region and help prepare Southern California for future emergency situations. With the COVID-19 crisis affecting all aspects of urban life for the foreseeable future, resiliency planning has never been more important. So now, yeah, I'll pass it on to Danielle and we can start doing some Q&A.
Yeah, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. We did have some questions that were posted on the chat. We did answer some of those. I can read some of them. I think one of them, I'm not sure that this might be a better question for the City of Santa Monica folks, but one of the questions was, since COVID is delaying school reopenings and there's an increased focus on creating health environments in school, are you guys familiar with any initiatives or opportunities in LA to partner with schools during this, recess to increase energy efficiency? Are you guys familiar with any initiatives that the City of LA is doing to, as they, reopen schools and try to make some upgrades? Drew or Amanda?
Unfortunately, I don't have any of those resources on top of my head, but I did recently receive an email I saw from the city of Palo Alto. I saw they were doing some really interesting work. They have a sustainability newsletter that was directed towards kids. And they had a whole issue dedicated to building electrification and, from a child's perspective, trying to figure out their carbon footprint and also doing an audit of their home and basically give themselves and their homes a score. And I thought it was really well done. So that's one thing that came to mind, just to how to involve kids in the building decarbonization discussion while they're at home.
That sounds great. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, and it's been great because we have been posting questions and the audience has been helping to answer them as you guys were speaking. So I think that was great, very interactive in that way.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Colleen. Thank you very much. I was trying to type it out, but I feel like I need to just say this. This is for Drew and Amanda. I've always admired what Santa Monica does or is doing in trying to be progressive and how they are trying to move their city towards being more sustainable. I know you're a leader in the nation, and I'm wondering, due to this COVID pandemic, how have the people, or have you noticed the communities more able to respond to or to adapt to the changes? How have you found the people in your community adapting to the COVID changes I feel like they're already sustainable minded. And if you think that has helped in any way, prepare them.
I mean, some things that we've noticed in a positive light, changes, it's more anecdotally, but I've noticed a lot more people on their bikes and walking around as opposed to their cars. We're trying to incorporate more like slow streets where it's just carless. They've also extended, they've eliminated on some streets some of the sidewalk parking to have more al fresco dining. And so people are still getting out there, supporting our local economy, but trying to do it in a safe, healthy way with the pandemic.
I'll take over from Amanda, and I'm really curious to pull our community's energy consumption data at the end of this year to see how it differs from years in the past. Because obviously people are at home, so they're using electricity more at home than in the office. But we do have a really large percentage of square footage of office space that uses a lot of energy. So it's going to be really interesting to see the energy impact at the end of the year. But we have been sort of sending out notes on social media and in our newsletters to provide tips on how to conserve electricity at home.
Great, thank you very much.
And I think too, we also at the very beginning when all this was happening, or around Earth Day too, our staff kind of went ahead and we did some videos at home of things that you can do to either conserve energy, maybe gardening at home, or ways that you could reduce food waste by proper food storage. So we were trying to do some sustainability tips at home. We're also doing some virtual film screenings with a environmental documentary and hosting a Q&A with that. So we still have some community engagement and involvement even with the current situation.
Great,
we probably have time for, thank you, Amanda. We probably have time for like maybe a couple more questions. Does anyone want to, unmute themselves? And there's also a question from Alexandra. Drew, I don't know if you're able to read it on the chat.
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to reply to that. So unfortunately, our city facilities aren't open to the public right now due to COVID. So the whole concept of this resiliency hub is, kind of mute right now since the facility is closed. But we obviously weren't prepared for this type of disruption where we can't even gather indoors. So that's really frustrating. So yeah, when you're planning for resiliency, what type of disruptions can you plan for, or should you plan for, and how do you prioritize those? That's something that as city staff and Resilience Hub planners have to deal with. So, and with respect to your question about getting information out, yeah, we haven't sent information out about the Resiliency Hub concept yet. That's something that is on the docket for this year, the next 10, 12 months.
Any other questions?
I have just one quick one for anyone willing to take this. Well, okay, so maybe for Drew, how do you find other communities that are in, I live in a food desert, inner city, and we are being hit very hard, small business. Do you find them reaching out, or is there a platform for people who are part of the business, the bids, the directors? How are they gathering to figure out new ways to be resilient? I just feel like Santa Monica can easily adapt because they already have the mindset to adapt to climate change, and COVID is just another challenge. Do you find them to be more responsive to the ways that you guys are doing this?
I do. I think there's a huge focus on economic recovery and economic resilience right now, just because of all the restaurants and businesses that had to shut their doors. So I'm really proud of our Emergency Operations Center and the staff that have been working, it seems to be around the clock, helping businesses try to find a way to reopen safely, and and messaging that on the city's COVID website, where they have a map of all the businesses that are open now, and just pointing out if it's a restaurant, different services that are provided. So really, it's just trying to reopen safely at this point.
Okay.
I don't know if Amanda, you have anything else to add with respect to the sustainable food question. I mean, our farmers markets have stayed open with special safety guidelines, and we're fortunate to have 4 farmers markets a week, which is pretty unique to Santa Monica.
And then we've also been doing some like food pantry, food bank distribution for any families that have been hit financially, helping them address so that they can still have access to food. And I believe, I'm not too familiar, but I think there's still some school food distribution because some kids were reliant on the food that was distributed at schools. So that's important to continue even when kids are at home.
Any other questions? Also, if you feel like some of the questions that we answered in writing during the presentation, if you feel like portions of your question were not addressed and you want to talk about it right now, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it again if you want to have a discussion about it. I think we can still address a few more questions if anyone wants to talk about it.
Hello.
Hi.
Question.
Okay.
I used to live right near Santa Monica and I loved it. So the question is, Santa Monica's small, as we saw. It's 7 or 8, 9 square miles, etc. How do they suggest or propose how this scales up for larger cities that may have more diverse areas to be able to incorporate into the plan? Do they have any suggestions on scalability, or is the LEED program designed for all levels of cities?
Yeah, I was just going to say the LEED for cities is a great framework for cities to kind of follow, especially if they're in the early stages of figuring out a sustainability plan. They can figure out what credits they want to work on or they want to incorporate in their city. Even Santa Monica, as we're going through the certification program, we're seeing credits that we haven't implemented or things that we would like to implement in the future. So I would highly recommend looking at the LEED for Cities certification program.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
And just touching on that question, I'll post a link in the chat, but yeah, the LEED framework does not apply to just small cities. It really can be any size. There's been cities such as Palm Beach County and Florida, Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's really widespread. It even goes internationally, such as Surat, India had pursued and was awarded the certification. So it just really depends, more focused on the population that you would like to have impacted and then who you want to focus on. But I'll post a link in the chat that just highlights some of those program or cities that were awarded the Bank of America grant this year and are pursuing the certification. So let us know if you have any other questions on that.
And Madison, even as you kind of mentioned at the beginning, it's technically like LEED for cities and communities. So you can even go down to the neighborhood level or a district or something like that if you wanted to just focus on a smaller scope. From our understanding, it's pretty flexible on how you kind of draw your borders and all of that.
Any other questions? And thank you so much for everyone that's participating and asking questions. So we really appreciate your interaction with us. Any other questions? we'll give a few more minutes, and if we have any other questions, we can address them. Otherwise, we could wrap up early.
Danielle, is your company working with cities to implement the LEED for Cities framework?
Not currently. I mean,
Okay.
we do work with a lot of organizations in terms of like, especially like public-private partnerships in addressing resiliency, but not specifically the LEED for Cities. We're really looking for, we have a very strong certification team, and we work with large scales. We manage over 4,300 properties nationally and internationally. So really looking forward to doing more projects with cities. So we're hoping to do more of that too. Any more questions? And Drew, or we have a little bit more time. I mean, do you want to make any final statements? And I guess if we don't have any more questions in the next 2 minutes or so, we could just wrap up the question and the panel. Michael, maybe put on the next slide so that there's some contact information. But I think yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for speaking today. I think that you did a great job, and I hope that the attendees found the information that was shared useful. And the session will be available on the Whova app. Look, we'll have the recording and the slides available afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Everyone.
And weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Friday. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.